The clock on the wall of Alex's apartment said exactly 9 p.m. when his cell phone rang, breaking the silence that had settled in after a long day of work. He answered, expecting to hear the voice of a friend or perhaps his mother. However, he was surprised to see the name of his boss, Mr. Reynolds, on the screen. "Alex, I need you to come to the office immediately," Mr. Reynolds said urgently. His voice was strained and tired, as if he was under immense pressure. Alex was perplexed. It was unusual to receive a call from the boss outside of work hours, especially with such urgency. He tried to get more information, but Mr. Reynolds just insisted that he come to the office as soon as possible. Reluctantly, Alex agreed and quickly got dressed. As he grabbed his coat, he looked out the apartment window and saw that the night was dark and rainy. A storm was approaching, and the weather seemed to reflect his growing sense of unrest. Upon arriving at the office building, Alex immediately noticed something was wrong. The building's lights were dim and flickering, creating a dark and unsettling atmosphere. Drops of rain hit the windows, creating a constant noise that echoed through the hallway. He walked to the elevator and pressed the office floor button. As the elevator went up, a strange feeling came over him. It was like something was out of place, but he couldn't put his finger on it. When the elevator door opened, he found himself in a dark and desolate hallway. The fluorescent lights were dim, some flickering intermittently, creating dancing shadows on the walls. The floor was wet, as if rain from the storm had entered the building. Alex walked cautiously down the hallway, wondering why the building seemed so deserted and silent. Typically, the office would be busy late into the night with employees working on important projects. But that night, there was no sign of life. Finally, he arrived at Mr. Reynolds' office door, which was ajar. He knocked softly and walked in, finding his boss sitting behind his desk with a somber, tired expression on his face. "Alex, I'm relieved you came," Mr. Reynolds said, looking up to meet him. "There's been something going on at the office the last few weeks, something I can't explain." Alex approached, feeling a sense of unease in the air. He looked around the office, noticing that it was dark and desolate, as was the hallway. The overhead lights emitted a dim, fading light, and the room was silent and devoid of the usual hum of computers and telephones. "What's going on, Mr. Reynolds?" Alex asked, worried. Mr. Reynolds explained that he had received reports of strange activity in the office over the past few weeks. Furniture moving on its own, voices whispering at night, and objects disappearing were just some of the unexplained events that occurred. He was concerned about the company's reputation and employee productivity, and felt it was time to investigate the situation. Alex was skeptical, thinking that perhaps his co-workers were pulling his leg. However, his boss's serious expression made him realize that this was not a joke. He agreed to spend the night at the office to investigate the paranormal happenings and make sure everything was in order. Inside, however, he was filled with apprehension, as something about the building seemed out of place, and he couldn't ignore this growing sense of uneasiness. Alex set up shop in the conference room next to Mr. Reynolds' office. He brought his laptop, some snacks, and a book to pass the time while he waited for any sign of the paranormal activity that had been reported. As the night progressed, the office remained eerily silent. There was no movement, and the rain outside seemed to muffle any noise that might arise. Alex started to feel uncomfortable, like he was being watched. But when he looked around, he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. He decided to start recording the activity on his laptop, capturing video and audio of the unexplained occurrences. However, what he recorded left his heart racing. Books fell from shelves without explanation, objects moved on their own, and lamps flickered intermittently, casting frightening shadows across the walls. As the night progressed, Alex began to hear the strange noises that had been reported. Muffled footsteps echoed through the hallway, although there was no one in sight. Sometimes he could have sworn he heard whispering voices, muttering indistinct words. Each paranormal event seemed more disturbing than the last, and Alex's uneasiness grew by the minute. He decided to make rounds around the office to investigate. Every corner he turned, he seemed to find something strange. Printers and copiers turned themselves on and off. Chairs spun as if someone had occupied them, and in one meeting room, he saw wet handprints and footprints on the wall, as if someone had desperately tried to escape. The night was becoming a terrifying experience. Alex continued to document each paranormal event, but he was increasingly nervous. He tried to call his boss, but his phone had no reception, as if it was locked inside the building. As dawn approached, he began to feel exhausted and isolated. He decided to take a brief nap in the meeting room to recharge, hoping that this was all just a nightmare. However, before he could close his eyes, he heard a loud noise coming from the hallway. A heavy shuffling sound echoed towards him. Alex stood up abruptly, his heart hammering in his chest. When he looked toward the hallway, what he saw left him cold with fear. An empty wheelchair was slowly moving towards him. There was no one pushing her, but the wheelchair continued to move as if it had a life of its own. The wheelchair finally stopped just a few feet away from Alex, and he stared in astonishment, trying to understand what was happening. It was then that he heard a harrowing moan echo through the room, filling the air with an ominous presence. Alex's heart raced, and he backed away, trying to find a way to escape. However, the empty wheelchair blocked his path, and he couldn't take his eyes off the shadowy figure that materialized before him. It was the silhouette of a woman dressed in ancient clothes, her lifeless eyes fixed on Alex. She reached her hand towards him, emitting a gut-wrenching moan. The shadowy figure's harrowing wail echoed in the room, filling the air with an atmosphere of dread. Alex was frozen, unable to look away from the ghostly silhouette before him. He felt a wave of shivers run down his spine as the figure slowly approached. "Who are you? What do you want?" Alex asked in panic, her voice shaking. The figure did not respond with words, but rather with images projected in his mind. Alex saw flashes of scenes from the past, as if he were witnessing moments in the woman's life. He saw a young girl dressed in antique clothes working in the office, her face full of hope and dreams. She was surrounded by coworkers who belittled and discriminated against her for being different. The images continued to unfold, revealing a toxic work environment and a series of injustices the woman had suffered. She had been isolated, her ideas stolen, and her work unrecognized. The injustice and suffering she experienced was almost palpable in the visions Alex was witnessing. The ghostly figure didn't utter a word, but Alex could feel the anguish and anger it carried at its core. It was as if her tormented spirit was seeking revenge on those who had wronged her in the past. Understanding the visions he was receiving, Alex was filled with compassion for the woman and the injustice she had suffered. He knew he needed to do something to help the anguished spirit find peace, not only to resolve the paranormal situation, but also to bring justice to the victims of the past. "I understand," Alex said empathetically. "I'm here to help. How can I help you find peace?" The ghostly figure didn't respond immediately, but its features seemed less terrifying. His lifeless eyes showed a mixture of gratitude and sadness. She started to walk away slowly, as if she wanted Alex to follow her. Alex didn't hesitate to follow the ghostly figure around the office, passing through dark hallways and empty rooms. It was as if she was guiding him toward a revelation, something that could bring the truth to light and allow her to finally find peace. Finally, they arrived at a dusty and forgotten archive room. The ghostly figure pointed to a set of old documents stacked on a table. Alex began examining them and soon realized that they were records of discrimination and injustices committed against women in the past. Alex knew what he needed to do. He took photos of the documents with his cell phone and made digital copies of all the evidence he found. He knew that by revealing the truth and bringing the injustices of the past to light, he could help the woman find the peace she so desperately wanted. With the evidence in hand, Alex turned to the ghostly figure and said, "I will expose the truth and ensure your story is recognized. You no longer have to carry this burden. Rest in peace." The ghostly figure looked at him gratefully and slowly disappeared, like a dissipating mist. The gut-wrenching wail that had filled the room disappeared, leaving behind a deep, peaceful silence. Alex was alone in the archive room, with evidence of past injustices in his hands. He knew he had a responsibility on his hands, not only to solve the paranormal activity, but also to bring justice to the woman who had suffered so much. With determination, he left the file room and began planning his next move. He would share the evidence with his boss, Mr. Reynolds, and ensure that the woman's story was recognized and the injustice was corrected. The night had been terrifying and otherworldly, but it had also been a journey of discovery and redemption. Alex was determined to honor the woman's memory and do whatever was necessary to ensure her story was told and justice was served. With evidence of past injustices in hand, Alex left the file room determined to share the findings with his boss, Mr. Reynolds, and take action to resolve the paranormal situation plaguing the office. He knew he had a responsibility on his hands, not only to bring justice to the woman who had suffered, but also to ensure that the paranormal activity ceased once and for all. As he headed to Mr. Reynolds' office, Alex couldn't help but reflect on the supernatural experiences he experienced that night. He had witnessed events that defied logic and rational explanation, and this left him deeply impressed by the world of the paranormal. Upon entering Mr. Reynolds' office, Alex found his boss looking worriedly out the window. Mr. Reynolds turned to Alex with expectation in his tired eyes. "What did you find, Alex?" asked Mr. Reynolds eagerly. Alex explained in detail the evidence of past injustices that he had found in the archive room. He showed Mr. Reynolds photographs of the documents and the digital copies he had made. He highlighted instances of discrimination and misconduct by some of the company's employees that had been documented. Mr. Reynolds listened intently, his expression alternating between shock and sadness as he learned the story of the woman who had suffered so much in the past. He felt deeply moved by the situation and agreed it was time for justice. Together, they began to come up with a plan to address the situation. Mr. Reynolds promised he would take steps to correct past injustices, including disciplinary action against those found guilty if they were still with the company. He also committed to honoring the woman's memory in some way, perhaps naming a room or space in her honor. With Mr. Reynolds' promise to do what was right, the atmosphere in the office seemed to change. The feeling of unrest that had hung over the building began to slowly dissipate, as if the anguished spirit was finally finding peace. Alex felt a sense of accomplishment and relief. He had played an important role in exposing the truth and ensuring that the woman's story was recognized. He knew his work was far from over, but he was determined to continue investigating the world of the paranormal and helping those in need. The next morning, when sunlight began to shine on the office, the paranormal activity had completely ceased. The door that had previously been locked from the outside was now unlocked, and the feeling of fear that had permeated the building disappeared. Alex and Mr. Reynolds shared a look of understanding and gratitude. They knew they had lived a unique and terrifying experience, but also a journey of discovery and redemption. The anguished spirit had found peace, and justice was being served. With a renewed sense of purpose, Alex left the office that morning. He knew his life would never be the same after that night, and he was determined to continue exploring the world of the paranormal and helping those in need. As the rain from the previous night's storm dissipated and the sun shone on the horizon, Alex looked at the office building one last time. He knew that he had lived an extraordinary experience and that he was ready to face the challenges that lay ahead on his new path, where the search for truth and justice would be his greatest motivation.